I'm going to start off this episode by asking, have you watched Pocahontas?
Pocahontas. I know the story, but I've never watched it.
I don't know the story and I've never watched it. So, today we are going to be talking a little bit about Pocahontas because there's a character in there that we are going to be talking about, and it's not John Smith, nor is it Pocahontas. But we are talking about John Ratcliffe. In the movie, according to the research that I've done, he's the main antagonist, and he is depicted as someone that's greedy and ruthless. Ratcliffe is said to lead an expedition to Virginia, the new colony that was found, and he wanted to find gold and other riches for the country that he was coming from, which is England. But in the movie, he's mainly motivated to find the stuff for himself. In the movie, Ratcliffe believes that the Powhatans, I believe that's how you pronounce it, the tribes are just barbaric and full of savages. And so Ratcliffe wants nothing to do with them, but just to terminate them and take their goods. In the movie, he meets up with John Smith, who has a relationship with Pocahontas already, and Smith and Pocahontas does not want a war between the two group, I suppose. Eventually, Smith gets captured. Now, Ratcliffe uses Smith's situation as a way to raise a war between the two, group, and as a way to get golds. So, eventually, the two teams is said to meet up with each other to fight and start a war, but the men refuses to fire at the Powhatans tribes. And so because the men refused to fight each other, the war never started, nor did it end. Oh well, it ended without starting, I guess. And then Ratcliffe
It ended, but it didn't start.
And then Ratcliffe is sent back to the England for his crime. I didn't know this, but the real Ratcliffe is not so arrogant, nor was he so stubborn or greedy as what Disney had depicted him in the Pocahontas movie. So in the real life, Ratcliffe was never sent back to England. He never initiated a war, but instead he did want to keep the colonists safe, give them food, give them shelter, protect them, and make sure that they survive. And instead, he got skinned alive by the Powhatans.
Holy fuck.
So today we are talking about John Ratcliffe, the real story of him. And we are going to be going into a little bit of the U.S. history.
I also feel like some of your childhoods are probably about to get ruined right now.
Due by 11:59.
Hi everyone, welcome to Due at 11:59. My name is Susie May.
And my name is Thomas Deletty.
All sources are in the descriptions, and if I miss anything or if there's anything I should know, just let me know in the comment. So let's get into it. John was born around 1549 in Lancashire, United Kingdom, north near Manchester. What? Lancashire?
I was thinking about how I pronounce it. It's like
Lancashire, right?
Lancashire?
Lancashire? John was originally named John Sycamore, but then he changed his name to John Ratcliffe because his mom, Alice, married his stepdad, John Ratcliffe, which is kind of funny. When I was doing the research, there were his last name was kind of spelled differently, some with an E, some with an F, some with a D. So, it was kind of confusing going into it, but we made it somehow. There wasn't much on him when I was searching him up, but he did work as a seaman in the United Kingdom, and around 1605, he served with the English mercenary force, which fought for the United Province of Netherlands. So it was also known as the Dutch Republic, and it was pretty much the alliance between the Dutch sectors until 1795.
And then they gave us Max Verstappen.
In December 1606, he became the captain of Discovery, which is one of the smallest ships that was set to go to the New World. It was smallest of the three and only had 21 men on that. The other two were called Susan Constant and Godspeed. So the goal of this trip, of the 3 ship, was to sail from London to the new colony. And at some point, Discovery got lost and lost sight of land for 3 days straight. So they became worried and discouraged, and they were starting to freak out. Because, they're in the middle of nowhere. And so they started to debate if it was better to just turn around and head back to the United Kingdom. But then eventually, they were luckily able to spot Virginia. Around April 25th, 1607, the crew arrived in Jamestown, Virginia, and soon it became one of the 15 colonies, as we learned in school.
15?
15 colonies.
13
original colonies. Oh my god. 13 colonies. Anyways, where did that 15 come from?
I don't know.
15 original colonies, no?
No, it's 13.
They landed in Chesapeake Bay to one of the most powerful Native Americans society on the Atlantic Sea, which was Powhatan tribes. And the chief at that time was also named Powhatans. I failed this part of history, so so just putting it out there if I make a mistake.
Colony.
So they apparently had ruled like 28 to 32 Algonquian speaking groups, something like that. That I really butchered, but it's alright. So the Native Americans called their land Senacomoco. And I don't know if I should even be trying to attempt this. So their land stretched from the south bank of James River up to the north to the south bank of Potomac River. How do I say it? I know I say it wrong. How do I say it? Potomac. Obviously, when the seamen arrived to the New World, the Native Americans were rightfully very strong on defending their lands from the Europeans. Now, the English were confused when they first saw the Powhatans' societal structuring because they didn't know who or what the Powhatan controlled. Some of the native group lived within Senacomoco, but were independent from the Powhatans tribes. Some were listened to Powhatans, but they weren't always faithful or loyal. And so the Englishmen were not exposed to this type of culture. They came from a society where they had a strict culture where there's king, queen, all that, There's structure, pretty much. Now, the Powhatan men fought each other in small battles, too, which it's not common in the English culture as well. So the Powhatan men would fight each other to avenge for one another, to increase personal status for political reason, and it was just a cycle of war between one another. Now that's what the Englishmen had first observed and assumed. And they believed that there was just no end to the war. And so the Englishmen were just confused. They were just confused because the way that they were fighting, the natives were fighting each other, were just that there was no end to who won the war and who lost.
It's like a never-ending cycle of war, kinda.
Pretty much, but that's what the Englishmen are thinking. They're thinking that it's like a full-blown war that they're used to, but it's not a full-blown war. It's just, I guess, a battle.
It's like a disagreement.
Rather than, I guess, communicating, they communicate with their body. I don't know.
It's like instead of saying, "Hey, please get out of my house," it's like,
Now, the Powhatans were not confused when they saw the Englishmen arrive. They've seen the Europeans before and they knew how they worked. Actually, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean, blah, 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 We're going to talk about a guy named Don Luis de Velasco. So this is like a couple years, if not like multiple years, before the Englishman, John Ratcliffe, arrives with his men. And so there was a tribe named Pasfaheg. Don Luis had left home to Spain after the Spain colonized America, and some believe that he may have been captured or he may voluntarily have left home to Spain. Now, during his time in Spain, he decided to convert to Catholicism. He may have been forced to convert to Catholicism. There's really no clear idea.
Was that before or after the Spanish Inquisition? I forget now.
In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. So, this is like after. I mean, I think this is like during the time of Spanish Inquisition. Because 1492 is when they started, like, they found the New World and they decided to just take over. And I mean, Spain ruled North America for a long time, I think. I failed this part of history, so.
I know the British is who we think of the most, but like.
Yeah, I mean, the Spanish were brutal.
And the French were. The Spanish were fucking evil.
I mean, the French were nice, at least-ish. Bare minimum, but...
And then the British, taxed us without representation.
Don Luis' original name was actually Paquiquineo. Paquiquineo. That's how you spell it. And that was his original name.
Paquiano, I think.
Paquiquineo, maybe? There's two Q.
Paquinao? Paquinao? I don't know. I'm Italian. I'm not Spanish.
No, this is like a Native American name, Thomas. Don Luis is a Spanish name. Don't whitewash it. Not you trying to colonize his whole name, dude. So Don Luis, I think I'm just going to call him that, even though it's not his real name, because it's easier to say. So I'm just going to call him Don Luis. So he returned to Chesapeake with a group of Jesuits missionaries. How do you say that?
Jesuit is right.
He returned to Chesapeake with a group of Jesuit missionaries, and this was after King Philip II granted him the permission to lead a Catholic group back to the Chesapeake. Now, during the trip, he stopped by at Mexico City, and Don Luis became severely ill during the stop. And so, even though they weren't planning to spend like a whole weeks or, many days there, they eventually had to. And this is where he changed his name from, the Native American name to the Don Luis name. The plan was to resume the trip, but he was unable to continue the trip, and so they were eventually forced to go back to Spain. Now, in September 9, 1570, he sailed back to James River successfully with no illness, and after a while, he was able to reunite with his family. Don Luis was very excited and was very happy to be back. In February 1571, who knows what happened or why he did it, but he led an ambush that killed all the missionaries in the New World, and they decided to only leave one young boy alive. So no one knows why Don Luis flipped so suddenly, but it could be that the Spanish weren't following the tribe's gift exchange system. Allegedly, a Jesuit had declined to offer gifts to Don Luis people, and so this pretty much offended the Native Americans, and that's why they decided to ambush the missionaries. However, personally, I think that there was a deeper meaning than just, a custom that was not followed. But that's just my opinion. So obviously the Spanish were fucking angry by what Don Luis and what the Native Americans had done. So in 1572, the Spanish sent soldiers to Virginia to find Don Luis. After the Spanish arrived in the New World, the Spanish hanged many, many Native Americans, but they couldn't find Don Luis. Now, there were rumors that he may have been Pocahontas, who was the chief of the Powhatans Confederacy from 1618 to his death, and he is Pocahontas' father. But there were some evidence that may prove otherwise, that he may not be Powhatans. The reason why I was going into Don Luis' history was because I wanted to emphasize that the Native Americans have experienced this, and they know about the Europeans, and so they were prepared, unlike John Ratcliffe's men who were new to the whole thing. Back to John Ratcliffe, he became the counselor of Jamestown colony when they first settled, and the president at that time was Edward Maria Winfield, who soon was removed from his position because John Ratcliffe and John Smith had worked together and discovered that the president, Edward, was hiding food for himself that the colony needed. And so they were like, get the fuck out of here.
What an asshole.
They exposed Edward's ass, and then Ratcliffe became the governor of Jamestown soon after, and he was smart and a thoughtful person. Soon people came to like him a lot when he became president after Edward was removed, but he didn't like him soon after because he started forcing some of the men to build the governor's house. Now, the colonists didn't like how he handled trade with the Native Americans, not because he was, being brutal or being a bitch or anything like that. In fact, it was quite the opposite. The colonists didn't like the way he handled the trades with Native Americans because he wasn't good with leading the people to retain their resources. He was giving the Native Americans more than what they had and what they were offered for food. Because of that, there was a food shortage in the summer of 1608. Now, in 1608, Ratcliffe was soon removed as the governor, also known as the president, and Matthew Scrivener took his position after. So Ratcliffe was soon elected president again after Matthew's leadership, and he asked Smith to help with dealing with the Native Americans, which was to, trade food and resources. But disagreement between the two soon ensued. Smith didn't like how Ratcliffe was treating the Powhatans. Again, Ratcliffe was too generous with the Powhatans, and the colonists were not benefiting as much as the tribes were from the trade. And so Smith became worried that they would run out of resources to trade, and a feud started to grow between the two. Now, it's alleged that Ratcliffe had Smith sentenced to be hung, but I don't think there was any evidence to support that. And in January 1608, there were only 38 men alive in the colony. Around 38 men. Ratcliffe and the council had planned to return to England on Discovery, the smallest ship, since there was really no hope for the colony's survival. But in the middle of this, Ratcliffe also ordered the men to build a capital in the wood. And so the men were kind of angry for valid reason, and they called this place Ratcliffe's Palace. So obviously the men were angry, and they were sick and starving at that point. They weren't making enough food for everyone, and they began accusing Ratcliffe of hoarding the foods, just like the first president. Now, by July, Ratcliffe decided to leave office with just 2 months before his term ended, and soon after he left for England. In the late 1609, Ratcliffe decided to return to the colony, and around October 1609, that was when George Percy was under the command of him, and so he sent John Ratcliffe to build a fort at Old Point Comfort. At this time, things started to tense up between Smith and Ratcliffe. Ratcliffe then sent Smith back to England to get him to act straight because they were just disagreeing constantly. Ratcliffe wanted to send Smith back so that he can act straight again and return to the colony, but Smith never returned to the colony after he was sent away.
Damn. Smith was just like...
Percy, the person leading the colony at that time, was an incompetent leader. The winter was approaching, and the men were already lacking in food in the summer. And so Percy failed to trade with the Powhatans, and the ship that were supposed to arrive with foods was delayed, and even when some arrived, it was not enough food for the men in the colony. At this point, the men have lost hope. They are starving. They are dying. They are pretty much freezing to death. But soon hope arrived at their door. Now, Spelman, who was on a good term with Powhatans, told the men that the Powhatan tribes, wanted to trade with them. And so obviously the Englishmen were ecstatic. They were starving again. Let me emphasize that. I don't know how much time I'm going to mention this, but...
We just want to be very clear. They had no food.
No food. Nuh-uh. Nada. But the fact that when they heard that the Powhatan tribes were willing to trade them for their resources, they were excited.
Ooh, we getting fed tonight. Let's go.
I mean, they finally have something to eat besides fucking rock. I don't know what they eat back in the days. No.
Rock.
Ratcliffe and the Englishmen got ready early in the morning, and they were excited to finally start trading again. And so they started to march towards the agreed location. Now, after a while, they finally saw the Powhatans, but something was odd. There was no corn in their hand, and the Powhatans started attacking the Englishmen all of a sudden. It was a trap. The Powhatans ambushed the men, and about 25 to 33 colonists, which was 2/3 of their number, were murdered right there on the scene. But they decided to leave Ratcliffe alone. They left him alive, and they separated Ratcliffe from his men and dragged him back to the Powhatans' tribe while they finished the men off. Now, Ratcliffe was dragged back to the Powhatans' village, and he was stripped naked. They tied him to the stake, and in front of him was a fire. He was staring at the fire as the heat burned his skin. So at this point, Ratcliffe was freaking out. And so was Spellman. Remember Spellman? Guy that told the Englishmen that the Powhatans wanted to trade with them?
Oh, yeah.
So his name was Henry Spellman. He came to America when he was only 14 years old, and he began to live with the Powhatans. He was close with them, and he was also close with Powhatan's son, Powhatan, also known as Little Powhatan, and he was shocked as well. He couldn't do anything at that point. It was way too late, but all he could do was watch as they tortured Ratcliffe alive. Now, the women in the tribe, soon after they tied Ratcliffe up, they walked over the basket and began carving Ratcliffe's skin off with mussel shells. After they carved his skin off, they tossed his skin into the flame and left his face for last. They forced him to watch as his skin burned to crisp in the flame. After they skinned him alive, they then burned him at the stake. Now, Spellman he felt betrayed. He felt lost. He didn't know what to do, and he felt like he was used because they used him to lure the Englishmen and have them killed. He didn't know what to do, and so he ran away from the Powhatans after this. Now, the Powhatans continued to deny colonists access to outside food source. When spring came, 160 colonists, which was 75% of Jamestown's population, were dead. And so that is the story of John Ratcliffe. I couldn't find much on John Ratcliffe. The timeline were a bit confusing, but I did try my best to make sense of it a little. But if there's anything that I missed, please let me know in the comment. And if there's any other cases that I should look into, let me know.
What's our great topic for next week?
That I'm still working on. There's a story that I want to cover. It's very short. I was hoping that I'll get it done by today, but I couldn't. So it's a short episode, but it's very interesting. But yeah, I hope you guys learned something new. I learned a lot about the U.S. history that I failed. And I will see you guys on the next episode. Bye.
See y'all. Bye.